really I'm just going to talk briefly about some experiences in running or developing or being involved with behavioural cultural change programs, mainly in the construction area, but I think it does have an implication, and there's a lot of stuff which can be cross-referenced and similar issues which can be pushed across any organisation. We're certainly having interest in the sports fields, in insurance and areas like that, and again from global organisations who are looking to try to change safety perception, safety cultures throughout the globe, particularly in South America and the Asia area. So what I'm really going to show is, I mean, I know we talked about briefly about why organisations are moving into this, and it's very interesting again from the legal side of things and the enforcement, where companies have got safety management systems in place. A lot of organisations will have a safety management system in place, they'll have training, they'll have all of these issues, but still when somebody comes in to audit them, particularly after any incident, they're being heavily criticised, and we're finding the enforcement guys are finding lots of issues and lots of problems in that the safety management system actually it doesn't work. That's not what they're saying at the sharp end. And indeed, when you start speaking to employees, again, how much knowledge do they have of that safety system? Is it does it truly reflect what they're doing when it comes to it? And often, again, it's not. There's a risk assessment which is written perhaps by a safety officer or is generic. Does that truly reflect what they're doing? And if it doesn't, what do they do about it? And things like that. Because if they have a risk assessment at the sharp end and it says we do A, B, C, and D, but they don't, and an accident happens, there's your legal document. We'll see you in court because you're not doing D, and there's your assessment. And if you talk to a lot of them, they'll say, well, we never do that, or we can't do that, or, well, the manager's here, he knows we don't do it, he hasn't done anything about it. So a lot of organisations will have that, the risk assessments and controls, and they are moving towards this more, behavioural, cultural, call it what you like, approach to try to get staff more involved, to try to make it, at the end of the day, their system. Because as we've said, most organisations now really truly want their staff to come to work and go home. But if you have a manager speaking to his staff and he's saying we've got to get production done, it's really, really important, everybody believes it. If you have a manager saying to them your safety is number one, very, very few people, very few, maybe a bit more, but it's much harder to sell that safety is important, because employees just think it's down to production targets, and the slightest little statement to them, even that you've got to get your targets done, that will reinforce that safety is not so important. It's actually, you're telling me that if something comes up, I've still got to get my targets. We've worked in a couple of organisations recently where just those little statements, when we're talking to employees, they're the statements that they remember. It's not that you can stop work, don't worry about that. It's I've got to get my target done. And so it's how you reinforce all of that, and it's giving ownership. And then I guess there's a couple of different options that we look at when it comes to behavioural and culture. And the safety climate tool is a great start. I'm just going to talk about generally. You have this approach where, in effect, it's top down, where senior management truly can change the way an organisation runs health and safety. And it's really important, and as both Karen and Jane have said, if you don't have management on board, it's not going to work. Any culture program, change program won't work unless you've got safety management on board. So the options are this top down, or you get everybody involved in it. And initially, lots of times the top down, it's motivating people to change and to do things slightly differently maybe. But how do you keep that going and going and going? Because that's quite short term often, and it's trying to, the more approach that works probably better is getting the staff involved, so they believe that it's truly their system, that they have an input into the system. It is their system. If they believe that, and they're helping to identify risks and the controls that go with that risks, then they're more likely to follow those controls. And actually, there's less of an excuse in effect when you think about it of them saying, I didn't know what the control was. Well, you're partly involved in agreeing those controls. So there's two options to look at. I just want to talk about a couple of ways that we've been involved in the past. But as I say, without management, and I'm talking about all line management involvement, because quite often it's that first level or second level of supervisors who have a huge impact on what goes on. And they've got a really difficult position, I think, because sometimes they're not sure, have they got the backing of their senior management to push safety? Is it okay for these guys at the bottom to stop work? Because the senior manager will say, yeah, but these guys aren't so sure, you know? Especially, and it comes back to training and competence, as we talked about in their behaviour, is especially if they haven't been given that back and they see no evidence of that back, or they're new and they're a bit unsure of their position. We were doing a programme, and it was in Northern Ireland, Belfast, where we were at a process of we had spoken to all the lads, and we had gone into second phase where we had small groups in. And it was early in the morning, and we had maybe 3, 4, 5 people who were in. They were reinstators. They went out and put tarmac on the road, basically. And part of this was to get their view on health and safety. We were just having a chat to them about, and bearing in mind, just before this, we had spoken to all the staff, and everybody was saying how important this is, and the management were there, and the senior management how important this was. We were in a small room talking to these 3 or 4 guys, and their supervisor, immediate supervisor, came in after about 20 minutes and says, "How long are you going to be? Because we've got to get out there and do the job. We've got to get out there and do work." And we just said, "Well, take how long it'll take." And out he goes, and the guys just turned to me and said, "There you go." That's how much they think about safety. Even though half an hour earlier, their senior manager was saying, "This is really important. We got to go out there and deal with that." But what we found out, and we looked a little bit more at this, was that supervisor was fairly new, and he was trying to make an impact with his employer, and he was trying to show that he was a good supervisor, and his perception was to get out there and get the job done. And he didn't believe that letting this go and letting us run through this whole program was what senior management truly wanted. And that's a big thing. So that first level of supervisors, I think, are very, very important. And interesting, if you think that after any incident, when the HSE come in and start investigating, one of the key players in that investigation, where they'll get a lot of their information from, perhaps evidence, will be that first line supervisors. So they are really important in this. They've got to be involved in this. So some of the experience we've had, I remember a long time ago when I first got into safety, and it was in the 80s, in the late 80s, we were involved in a project in the construction sector, and safety wasn't that high on the agenda in those days, and we were inputting, the guys were putting in cable televisions, they were digging up the road, putting in cables. And they were hitting loads of cables, cost a lot of money, and I guess the first real impact on me personally, and on the company probably, was we had a guy who was killed. He hit an underground cable. But the interesting thing about it was he had actually exposed the cable. So he knew it was there. He was practically standing on top of it. So he knew that there was a risk there. He should have. Experienced guy. And what he was doing, he had a small jackhammer, and he was just trimming the top of the trench, and it slipped and went into the cable, exploded. So there's a big impact on us, and because of all the damages, no one really measured what was good or bad. No one really knew. And all the lads had this perception was we had to get that work in as quickly as possible. Same as in any work area, production was king. And they didn't believe anything that was coming out from senior management. So what we had, and we didn't call it behaviour programs or culture programs or anything like that at the time, what we had to do was change the whole working environment, including management's view. And we did that first by, we put in a training program, and it again goes back to what Jane said. We had a trainer in who was believable, who knew what the situation was, who knew the situation, who knew the type of work, and was able to talk in the lads' language. We also, going back to a quick win, we had to show that the company were serious about health and safety. And luckily we had one senior manager who was involved in that particular division area, who saw that it was important. And this was either top down. He really backed us. He believed in it 100%, even though other areas of the companies didn't. And what he did was, we had to detect the cables. The guys had to detect cables, but in those days they didn't have really any means to detect. They had no plans or anything like that. So what the senior guy said is, okay, we will employ one specialist to go ahead of the teams with specialist detecting equipment, cable plans, everything else, to detect everything, to assist. So first of all, the lads are saying that, maybe our safety is important. We then were sort of saying to them, look, we will also give you the equipment as each team. And again, in those days, that wasn't dreamt up. What, you're going to give 100 teams, you're going to spend thousands and thousands of pounds on cable equipment to promote to help our safety. The other side of it was, we were going to stop the cable damages and the expense to the company. So there was a good business case for doing this, because what we started to do as well was we introduced a KPI. Again, that's KPIs that are being talked about today. We introduced the KPI because in the past we were hitting cables, and no one really knew what was good or bad, because it was just, how many cables do you hit? So we introduced a KPI which says we'll hit so many cables per 1,000 meters. So all of a sudden people could start looking at and benchmarking what was good, bad and indifferent. So we had, in effect, we had started communicating to the staff with somebody who they believed in. We had senior management who also believed that health and safety was important. For whatever reason, be it financial from the point of view of not hitting cables, or moral, to stop people killing themselves, they believed in it. And they pushed health and safety by indicating, we're going to invest in this. We're going to give you the means to do your job a little bit more safely. We're going to give you the training to do it, the equipment to do it, the specialist guys to come in on top. And we also reviewed their work pattern, because it goes back to these processes and procedures. When you look at it in your own organisation, do you have risk assessments which do work? Are your procedures practical? Do they really work? Because if they don't, again, people will put people off. Procedures don't work. People aren't interested. And so what we were doing in those days already was a behavioural cultural change. And the interesting thing was, what we were able to show, there was two elements in the company, and really get hold of this. The side of the company who really pushed this saved thousands and thousands of pounds on the cable damages. So they stopped hitting so many underground cables. And we were able to show through a period of time that this worked. We were able to show there was a moral issue, but we were also able to show the business benefit of it. And the good thing with this is people started to believe, and I think that's the important thing about any behavioural change. People start to believe that there's a point to it, that it works. And then when a guy asks you something or reports something or relates to something, that somebody takes the time to listen to them and try to deal with it in some way. And we were able to show that utility damages are falling. So and that was an early example, but it was really key that that manager took hold of this and believed in it. And that was a very much top-down, but the good and benefit, even though it was a top-down sort of situation, is because of the success of that, and I think it is about shouting at the successes, it influenced the other areas of the company to believe that this was the way to go, and actually start involving staff. And the good thing was the employees started generally to take health and safety a lot more seriously, because they could see the benefit for themselves. And what did we learn? A few things. We learned in none, and I say this was before really that the behavioural cultural thing really took hold. We believe, number one, management backing is essential, and these are all obvious, but they're essential. If you're going to run any behavioural change program, you've got to get the backing of management. It's been said a few times. It won't work if you don't get that. This trust, and trust is the strange one. How do you get trust? It's making staff believe that if they stop the job or report something, that somebody won't jump on all over them, that it will be taken seriously. And when you do these presentations and employee, we just did one recently with staff that do work careers advice in prisons, and we had all those staff together, and in effect gave them the ability, just tell us what you think, tell us what your problems and what your issues are. And the worry from management is, it's the Pandora's box, isn't it? All of a sudden, lots of things are open, and out comes all these issues and problems. But it is much better to get those so that you can put a program in place for dealing with that. The important thing with that is, once you get that information, is to get back to people very, very quickly as to, okay, you've raised these issues, and this is what we intend to do. It's not a blank check. But we are going to come back to you, and this is our program for dealing with the issues. And there were some very, very serious issues that come from that, which you can't immediately deal with. First line supervisors need to have confidence. You know, it can't be the safety team that's running this. It's got to be line management, and they have got to have the confidence. What are they doing? What does it involve? And if people do raise issues, what do they do about it? And we say this on a regular basis. We send management on IOS training courses which are good, or other training courses which are very good, but quite often they'll come out of that and say, what to do? How do I manage health and safety? Because they're still not sure how to manage health and safety. So you've got to give them very good advice on what managing health and safety actually means. And again, that's looking at specific KPIs. I'll come on to that in a minute. This was an interesting one that we found that staff wanted to know where they stood. And again, the construction was a good example of that. Is when we talked to the guys who were doing the job, what they didn't like was a supervisor who came on site and one day safety was important and the next day it wasn't. They wanted someone, even though there were strict rules, to say, that's the rules. And if you don't do that, then this is the consequence. Now, if the rules didn't work, that was one thing, but the rules were pretty sensible. They agreed with the PPE and all the rest of it. You do that, not today, just today, and tomorrow when we need to get the job done, forget it. You do it, full stop, and you do it all the time. So the behaviour came, that was what we did. There was no doubt about it. So the supervisors have got to know what are the rules, and they've got to, safety simple. These are the risks, these are the rules, and then it's enforcing those rules. If the rules are sensible, the supervisors have got to believe they can enforce those rules. And what are the consequences, what are the actions if those rules are broken? And that's got to be quite clear, I think. And if that means the job has got to be stopped, then they're okay to stop it. And one of the things we found was really important was where actions such as that was taken elsewhere in the company, that was publicised so that everybody knew that it was okay to stop the job if there was a problem. People didn't believe that. So it was really important to publicise that and give examples of where that had happened and happened successfully. This staff wanted a level playing field, you know. Again, that comes back to, let's stick to the rules. We don't want different rules in different areas of the company. We want everybody, management, to have to follow rules. Again, a good example of that, I think, is during fire drills. And we get this a lot, where it's the manager who doesn't have to go out on the fire drill. You know, that's not the way it should be. It should be everybody or no one, and that's where it comes to this walking the talk. Managers going on site, not where it used to be the managers could come on site, not where the hype is. Well, no, you've got to. And if they don't do it, then the perception is it's not that important. You know, I don't know if any of you have read there was a report done on the Twin Towers incident where they interviewed all the survivors. And the interesting thing that came out of that was that on average, when the aircraft hit and the alarms went off, on average, I think it was 3 minutes between the alarms going and people beginning to leave the building because they turned off their computer, shaved their work, went to the toilet, changed their shoes, all these up to 10 minutes before they actually started to leave. 2 companies got most of their people staffed out. It was Morgan Stanley and I think the US Customs. And one of the reasons they said that they got everybody out was when they did the fire drills and that coming up, the fire marshals, the management were very strict. This is what we do. This is what you've got to do. And they got most of their staff and they will say that was it. And that was a behavioural issue. You know, people behaved in that way. It was accepted. That's the way they did. Staff definitely wanted to feel part of the system. People were getting very frustrated, and I completely understand. I think this is where you get a safety advisor, somebody, or manager coming in all of a sudden saying, right, these are the rules, these are the risks, and these are the rules. They wanted to be involved in that. And again, when you do a lot of consultation with staff, they will come out with totally different risks sometimes. Because some of the high risks that we see, they feel are quite well controlled. You know, we're doing that, we're doing what we can with that. What about, we found people coming into work on Monday mornings are still suffering with alcohol from the night before. You know, whatever it is, these guys were telling us. And the other thing to look at in this, after any incident, what often happens is during the investigation is a manager or employee will say, I knew that was going to happen. That was going to happen because of the way we worked. So you've got to give the opportunity for those people to actually tell you these are what our concerns are. And once they feel, and you talk about just cultures and things like this, where people have an input into the culture, into the rules, into identifying the risks, they are more likely to follow them. And I'd say if they know what the consequences of not following those rules are, then again, it makes it much easier for management to manage the health and safety side of things. This staff did accept the strict rules if they saw the sense, if they were sensible rules, they were given the backing, you know. And again, what we're talking about PPE, things like PPE, there's a lot of complaints about types of PPE. So again, another organisation, we know that when it comes to safety harnesses, they will buy new harnesses every 6 months rather than just going through the whole maintenance of them, because they think it's much easier. Plus, they have all, you know, they trial out different harnesses with staff and they decide which is the harnesses that they like. So staff are more likely to wear them and accept them. So they've got to be sensible, they've got to work. But once they're working, once they're in place, management's got to enforce them. And this no blame doesn't really work. Everybody's got responsibilities, but it's clarifying, making clear what those responsibilities are. Again, particularly for line management, because not always do they realise or know what their responsibilities are. And if you're changing that behaviour and culture, you need to make those responsibilities very, very clear. And this just culture we talked about, I'm just mindful of the time. Also tracking and measure, because you've got to look at, and again, I think it was mentioned earlier, if you put in KPIs or anything to track the controls, people's behaviour, you got to review them on a regular basis, because if they're not working, then you got to change it. If they're too high a target, people again will get fed up with them and will decide, well, we're not going to bother with this. I think one of the difficulties when you're benchmarking within organisations is getting the people who come at the bottom all the time, getting them moving up, as opposed to them saying after a while, well, this isn't working, I can't be bothered anymore. And that's something that we need to look at. Tracking and measuring on the culture side is, how do you measure that? How do you measure culture? And certainly the safety tool is one good way of being able to do that, to measure where are we here now, where will we be in 6 months, where will we be in a year's time. And we're good at measuring the harder stuff, you know, maintenance, people wearing PPE. We're not so good at measuring the softer stuff, like the communication, the competency skills. And they are probably the biggest risks of all, because after every accident, and again, authorities know this, you know, you've got procedures and processes in place, they will look at, do managers walk the talk? Do they communicate in a way that staff understand? And that's not just saying, here's a toolbox talk, these are the rules, and walking off. That is more about, do you follow that up? Do you practice what you preach? How often do you come on site and talk? How often do you praise people? And all that is part of this whole cultural program. So that tracking and measuring is really important. So program, this is another one that we did. This is just an example. And again, as has been said before, there's lots of different theories. There's people in here that know those theories much, much better than I. And it's got to be specific to your organisation. But again, this is another organisation which came and they want to run this, a behavioural type program. And we started this by, they do an annual safety presentation. And they started this by having a presentation to inform everybody from top down what was going to happen. So I thought it was a good way of starting some sort of program. And it was their MD that introduced this and backed this. And they invited clients as well as all staff, so everybody could see everybody was involved in this. And he did that whole presentation, but and let's be honest, it was good PR for them as well, because they were showing their clients, you know, this is important. This is important, I guess. We then went and did more specific presentations to the line management, because I say it was key that line management were involved to explain to them, because there are some people or some institutions who are looking at behavioural programs and believe they're bad things because all it is about putting more pressure or blame onto employees. And I guess some of the badly run ones perhaps do that. But we had to get line management board and give them again this trust that it wasn't about bashing them. A lot of supervisors and managers will believe they are managing safely and pushing safely. And when you ask them the question, they will say that, yeah, we think we are managing safely. When you ask the employees, they're saying, we never see them, they never talk about it. But they don't realise that. Now it's not saying they're wrong and they're right, it's saying that somewhere in between, the perception is not there. And that's where the surveys and stuff like that help. So again, we did that survey to find out where people stood, what people's ideas, what people's thoughts are, to give us that baseline about where are we going to go with this. We did specific presentation to smaller groups, get much more information about where the risks are, what their attitudes were, etc., etc. And then fed back to everybody to show, well, this is what came out. Because people are interested, you know, you want people to talk to you, so it's important that you give that feedback to them and see if there is any sort of anything different, or was there a trend coming out across the board. And then from that, from what we got from all of those, then developing a specific program. And that's something I think any organisation can do. It's a presentation, it's telling everybody what we're going to do. It's getting a line management on board, and then it's doing that survey to see what are you coming out with, where are we, where do we stand now, and then putting a program depending on that. And I know Jane and I will talk about the different programs. This was really interesting as well. And this has only been done in the last 2 years, and this company believe that they're very good at safety, and I think in general, you know, they haven't got a bad safety record. 2 divisions. And what they found again was, on one, it was really pushing really well. On the other, there was one person who stopped everything going on. And then all the staff knew this, and everybody else knew it. This was this one, because he was fairly senior, and he talked it, but when it came to it, he didn't get involved at all, and he wanted production pushing. So it was this one person who was done. I'd say everybody knew. And of course, we weren't going to stop any program going on just because of one person, but we've got to have some way of trying to change that and trying to bring him into the game a little bit. Or at least, if he wasn't going to change, to put more pressure on the board to change him, or to put pressure on him to change. And what we've done on there, is what we did with this, and again, there's no right or wrong, this is what we decided to do. We decided to set some clear, and this was a group of staff, set some very clear, very easy, very specific key performance indicators. Easy to hit, very, very easy to hit. And we said that each division should have a certain number of safety meetings, but it had to include these guys, that level of management. They had to be involved. I think it was 1 a month just to get things going. But also then they had to get that signed off by senior management. So again, it was pulling in that senior manager so that he could see what was going on. So this manager was aware that the senior management above him was also aware of whether he was going to attend or not attend. Each of those teams had to identify 2 KPIs specific to what they were going to do, and they had to be signed off. Part of those was, in their case, briefing out certain types of paperwork and making sure that they were complete. And what we're saying is on that is that, and you probably can't see that, it's a badly thing, but basically it was a step process to this initial line in the sand. And one of them will go there very, very quickly, and the other one won't. But that's okay. It's okay to have different KPIs for different divisions and different areas in the company. You want to have an overall view. It goes back to what is the overall view. But it's put a little bit of pressure on these guys to move up. There only is 2, so there's always going to be one ahead of the other, probably. These guys will enjoy it and will try to be pushing more and more all the time. And these guys, the way we're seeing it is there's a much more pressure on them to keep pushing, not to be too far left behind. Actually, one of the big drivers in this as well is the client. Because these guys work for one client, these guys work for all, and that client also won't accept certain things. So again, that's a big push. So it is a case of identifying where the organisation is, having some performance indicators or some targets to push up to, and just gradually go there, and again, review the KPIs and move them all the time so that we're moving up. But they will be at different levels for different organisations. That's slow and that's quick. And you can see, does it work? Well, this is what this organisation is doing, and they've got a mix of proactive and reactive indicators, as again was said we should have. And you probably can't see this. The 2 different divisions, obviously coloured blue and the light blue, and the ones that are doing the most percentage of talks, the audits, they're the ones. Funny enough, they've got more 1 to 7 day lost time incidents, but they've got less minor and less radar. They are reporting things much, much better, they've got confidence to report things. They're okay with that. No one's jumping on it. And it is reflecting. They also, the number of near miss hazard cards that they put in is enormous compared to anybody else. It's absolutely huge. And they've made it as easy as possible for them. But they believe in it because the guys have the trust of the management that they can put these in, and there's feedback coming back, and they can see certain changes being made, some quick wins. Even if that is, we don't like this particular, I don't know, safety glasses, okay, we'll look at it, and if we can do it, we'll change it. And that gives people the confidence that, yeah, people are taking this seriously. And that is really reflecting in what is going on at the sharp end. It really is. They're reporting more near misses, and funny enough, they're reporting more minor injuries, but they're getting less of the 3 days and Ritter accidents. And it's so they see it's working. And also when they're going to a client now looking for work for them, they've got good evidence to show that this behaviour program is being taken very, very seriously. And it all started with that survey and trying to find out where we stood. And they'll go back and they'll re-look at the whole thing again and look at people's attitudes as we go on. And the change, and we're moving here quickly because of time. It can that sort of setup can go wherever in any organisation. It's a similar thing. It's not just construction or oil and gas. You know, presentation. You've got to get senior management board, so they've got to know and believe and understand what's going on, and you got to really sell it to them. And I think that's the thing with health and safety. It's not sexy. It's not a great subject, but you've got to be able to sell that to senior management to get them on board. And that is back to the moral, financial, and legal issue. Corporate manslaughter and that has changed that slightly because a lot of boards are getting a little bit concerned about corporate manslaughter and the financial implications. I think we did something with British Museum where we had 20 minutes and it ended up being an hour and a half to talk to the guys because they had an interest in it. But it's also not just telling them what the issues are, it's giving them some sort of, this is what we can do about it, it's simple. Presentation, all line management, getting them on board, reviewing the accidents and incidents and issues that are in the organisation, the surveys. I think another great way of getting people involved is doing departmental or area risk reviews where staff are involved in identifying risks and getting them to help identify which are the big risks and where are the controls in place. And that's a good way of getting people more involved in the whole health and safety issue. And getting them to prioritise and run with it. So key elements is where do you stand now? There's some sort of survey to help doing that. It's leading from the top, getting management buy-in, that's all management all the way up and down. Setting clear goals. It's got to be relevant to the staff, you know, because again, organisation will have a load of risks and you still see it, departments will have a file full of risk assessments, half of which don't apply. They're going to training and half of the training doesn't apply to it. It's got to be relevant to the staff for buy-in. That trust, communication is really important in any health and safety. As I say, I think that's one of the biggest risks, is lack of communication or poor communication. But also evidence in communication from a legal point of view. How can you prove that you've told your staff these are the rules? And part of that evidence is again this walking the talk, because having been involved in some fatal investigations, the authorities go in and they ask management, when was the last time you were at the workplace? When was the last time you had a safety meeting? When was the last time you spoke to someone? Do you know what the issues are? Clear rules and responsibilities. Management must respond to suggestions and issues and give them feedback and review. Just very quickly, just going through some of these important areas. The communications, you got to tell, you got to really explain that to managers properly. I know it's daft, but they've got to realise that it's not just about what they say. They've got to be seen to do it. And again, I don't think they realise that that is so important and how they behave. All the training is about the risk assessment, but more should be done with how do you behave when you talk to people. And in all fairness to most line management, they're not really sure. They don't know. The process of communication, that's always interesting when you go in and ask any line manager, senior manager, how do you communicate health and safety? What's the process? Because they're not really sure. And if they're not sure, then perhaps there is an issue. So it's going back and having a look at how do we communicate the health and safety, which is up, down, up, side to side, external, internal. How is that whole process done? And the danger is, again, as has been said already, is collecting so much information. What do you do with all that? And the interesting thing with the KPIs and information, what you're collecting also on inspections and audits, if there's a lot of negative stuff, what you're doing is collecting evidence that you're not addressing health and safety. And again, when you speak to legal people, the lawyers that are dealing with all these cases, they will say one of the biggest issues they find with organisations is exactly that. They're doing inspections, they're doing audits, they're identifying areas that are wrong. But there's no evidence that we're putting it right. Or at safety meetings, they're talking about issues, and then they disappear. Well, there's no evidence of them ever doing anything right. So those have got to be closed out. The whole behavioural program is all about identifying issues as well and getting people involved and improving. But you've got to evidence that. What's expected from all staff? Be honest, what the difficulties, particularly with senior management. I mean, let's say we've just done these programs of in effect, employed consultants with this group of staff, and there's a huge list, and you just feel a bit embarrassed going back because the Pandora's box has been opened. But it's better they know that. It's better that they know these are the issues, you know, and can deal with it, because some of them are very, very big issues, rather than having an incident and everything that goes along with that. And all the staff saying, we knew that would happen. And the authority was just say to senior management, why did you not know? Everybody knows in that company that there's this one manager who's stopping everything. They have a serious incident, that's where they're going to be heading. And it doesn't matter what anybody else does, because they'll be able to evidence that this company does not take safety seriously, because this senior manager is in his position, and everybody knows that when it comes to it, he's not addressing the issues, and he's not giving anybody else the backing. It's even worse because the other side of the company are involved in that. So you got a difficulty, you got to sell it, and I think that's really important with all this. It's selling it, the importance of it. And again, I think as Ian said, some will go for moral, some will go for financial, some will go for the legal, and it's finding out where that is. But it is also having somebody who can sell it to them, and that's really important. Visibility of management doing this, and promoting the ability of staff to communicate. That's the big one, I think. The communication is really, really important. Management involvement, say just very quickly, it's visibility of management. Listening, as we said, about management have got to be in a process where they listen to staff and be seen to listen, so there's got to be some sort of process of feeding back and coming back to staff. And then acting. Now that, I say, that's not a blank check, but it's showing staff that, okay, this is what we're going to do over the next 6 months, over the next year, to address the issues that you've got. Approachability. Some managers are very approachable, others aren't, but get them to sign on. Again, this was raised yesterday about the safety policy, where you have a champion, or you have a safety director, or an MD that signs a safety policy, or it should be everybody's involvement. And I know in the past we've had companies do a statement of intent, or where all directors or senior management sign the fact that they are taking the health and safety board. It's only a piece of paper, but it's important that they've signed on to this whole process and understand what it involves. Making staff believe that if it comes to it, they can stop work. So the publicity where that happens is very, very important. They've got to believe that. If they don't believe it, they're not going to do it. There are mixed messages, and trying to get rid of these mixed messages where particularly managers are saying targets are important. Forget about the safety today because we've got to hit this target. And looking more at, if it comes to it, okay, that's fine. We'll deal with the consequences of not hitting that target. That's a nettle that's got to be grasped, more so in some organisations, I guess, than others. But as soon as you turn around and say, don't worry about that, we've got to get this done, the whole safety programme is not back in a big way, because people then will say, well, it's not that important, is it? And setting safety as a priority and integrating it into, again, that's been said, it's got to be part of the overall management. They've got to manage safety in the same way as they manage every other aspect of the job. And senior staff have got to be involved in the whole reporting process. It can't be left to the safety manager, or they've got to be involved in it. They've got to take responsibility for it. We've got to make it easier for them to take that responsibility. We've got to make it clear what does managing safety actually mean. And again, that's the difficult part for safety managers again. So programs, where are you now? Taking into account the survey, the accidents, the incidents, the risks, the documented system. Does your documented system really work? Do the controls really work? Are you confident that if something happened tomorrow and there was an investigation, you could say, yes, those controls work? Were they communicated? Were they monitored? And that's two big key elements of those controls. Were people competent in what they were doing? And once you've done that, then it's putting in that program. You identify the starting point, you get management on board, raise the awareness through the surveys, through the presentations. You've got to let people know what's going on. Set the goals, get employee feedback, and then you're developing your program on that, and it's just constantly reviewing that, going back to surveys. Where have you improved or have you not? Do you have to change the KPIs or not? Do you have to change the training program? What exactly is it to do? And this is something just very quickly taken from the Olympic Park, and they identified as part of this whole process these stages of culture and maturity, behaviour maturity, from infancy to this continuously developing. And the first one is no strategy in place, in effect, for behaviour safety awareness, little understanding across management levels of the impact and importance good leadership has on effective safety management. And we're seeing, certainly in construction, that that's moving quite quickly. But it's a good one to go back to, I guess, and look at your organisation. And I think this is freely available on the web, but we're going to send this to you anyway. Second one is developing, is a basic strategy developed. Implementation is underway. Understanding from management and how their contribution impacts on achieving behavioural and cultural change. The next one is active engagement with directors and managers and employees, which is apparent. Leaders are committed through development relationships at every level. Then you go into establish, which is key characteristics of behavioural safety are present at all levels, including the supply chain, which again is an interesting one, that you get in the supply chain involved in this, because they have an impact. And finally, one that core value for all stakeholders. And working unsafely is not tolerated in any way, shape, or form. So we've really pushed through that very, very quickly. But I think the whole program, or a program as such, there's some key areas of it which can go to any organisation at all. It's not just the construction side of things. And it is about finding out where you are now and the attitude of staff, and then putting in that program to develop those. Everybody's got to be on board. Certainly the line management are key. And hopefully, and the evidence is that if it's done properly, it does have an impact. And once people are on board, it sort of hopefully steamrolls a little bit, and you can get that moving. Well, hopefully today has been useful, and giving you a few things to think about. And say, contact any of these guys from the laboratories themselves, any further questions. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you.